Welcome to our Future Law Rules as Code event, jointly organised by the Australian Society for Computers and the Law and the Allens Hub for Technology, Law and Innovation. I am super excited to be here with you today. My name is Natalia Crnomarkovic from EY Law. I lead the AUSCL Future Law portfolio and I'm on the Management Committee. Before we begin proceedings, I would like to acknowledge the First Nations people of the various lands from which our expert panel and all of our participants have joined today. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. On the screen is our panel, moderated by Professor Lyria Bennett Moses from the Allens Hub. Our panel, as you can see, consists of world-renowned experts from industry, government, academia, and the perfect mix of technical and law. Immediately following the panel session, we will be launching the Australia and New Zealand RAC Community of Practice, and I'll be making a few other announcements then too. Just a reminder, this event will be recorded. We will send you a link to the recording, full speaker bios, and all the important links after this event. If you have questions for our panelists, don't hesitate to pop them in the Q&A. Now, Lyria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you as well to our amazing and esteemed panel. I'm really excited about this conversation. We're going to go all the way from introducing rules as code for people who might not have encountered it yet, through to some of the sort of hot questions at the front edge of practice. So please stay with us and we will just get started. So my first question is for all the panelists, which is, what is rules as code about? And what is new here, given that legal rules have been automated in areas like welfare since the 1970s? Pia, do you want to start us off?
Yes, so long as there's been computers, we've been codifying rules. There's nothing new in the concept of rules being codified because we've always had to do it. What's new here is a little bit the nuance of what's possible when you actually take a digital first approach to legislation, to regulation, and effectively to reimagining what rules look like in the 21st century. So when you build law and rules and legislation and regulation purely in an analog form, it is slow, it's considered, it takes quite a while. And what's happened is that the world has got infinitely, exponentially more complex over the last few decades with globalism, with just a dramatic increase in the rule sets and around the world, and the intersection of those rules and what it means for people's everyday life. So one of the challenges that we have is that every time we add a new rule or we change a rule in the system, there is now more unintended consequences than ever before. So one of the challenges that we have now is, how do we model the impact of change and actually get predictable outcomes from rule changes in this just enormous, complexity, web of complexity, global complexity? The second problem that we currently have is that how rules are encoded in business systems and computers is very rarely visible or traceable back to law, or I guess held to account in terms of its accuracy. And it's very interesting because government does regulation very well in a lot of cases. We regulate how other people are applying our rules, but how do we apply our own rules is very rarely clear. So the problem of actually having visibility, traceability, transparency, accountability, appealability of our own rules is a problem we have right now. So rules as code, in short, ends up being a means of actually developing human and machine rules at the same time from the start, so that you actually have a better line of sight between policy and implementation, better line of sight between actual law and the implementation of those rules, and delineation between authoritative rules like legislation or regulation, and less authoritative rules like policies of departments, like operational policy. That right now, those things are mashed up, and it's almost impossible to be able to figure out what is true in business systems. So having that delineation between them is absolutely critical. So the future state then becomes one where you have the rules as code, you have the legislation and the regulation as code that everyone can apply in a common way, in a consistent way, in an auditable way, in a monitored way, and you have that delineation between policy and law, so that you can ensure that what you do is appealable, is accountable, and suitable. I hope that's a start to kick off the conversation, but I've been working on this sort of as a passion for about 5 years now, and started with financial regulation, of which there's a lot of prescriptive rules that make sense for this kind of work, and I'm just finding more and more and more every day that is suitable, not just in prescriptive, but even going through to looking at things like Indigenous protocols and how they might be codifiable to ensure Indigenous protocols are maintained, even with things like artificial intelligence. So there's a lot to discuss. It's a wonderful panel, and I'm looking forward to jumping in. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. That is a very, very helpful introduction to the field, and also I think captures some of why it's really important to think about things through these kinds of lenses, but particularly when you talked about accountability and traceability. Guido, I might go to you next, and I know you have quite a long sort of historical view on rules as code and where it fits in. Did you want to introduce the topic from your perspective?
Oh, yes, thanks. So as you said, and also as Pia said, the rule as code, it's not particularly novel. And as Pia said, since we had computer, the idea of codifying law has been around. And actually, the idea started well before. So for what I know, the first approach, the first time that, let's say, the use of computers for representing and reason with law has been proposed was back in 1949 by Frank. And at that time, according to the IBM CEO, there was market for just 5 computers in the world. And then, well, it evolved. Then back in '63, Lehman Allen proposed a methodology to encode legislation into a logical format. Then back in '77, Thorne McCarthy created the first workable system, Taxman, where he tried to encode some, well, of course, taxation legislation in US. But probably the change of pace started back in the early 80s with the British Nationality Act as logic program approached by the Imperial College guy. And then some really workable system, and probably the first expert system on a large scale, which was really working, was developed by Richard Susskind in '87, and also he has in his book he has a very comprehensive descriptions on the legal system, legal expert system at that time. Now, the difference, I would say, between what was then and what we have now, it's the speed in which we can encode and the methodology. So back in mid 80s, Susskind created a very sophisticated and advanced legal expert system, and it took 2 people, him and another colleague, about 2 years to encode a relatively small piece of legislation. We did some experiment in the past couple of years, and for the same complexity, we can encode in 3 months and 1 or 2 per people at most. So the approach is now, first, we didn't have the technology, we didn't have the infrastructure to realize rule as code. Now we have the technology, computer power, it's really advanced. And also we have over 40 years of research in the area of legal informatics, artificial intelligence and law. So we know very well what works and what doesn't. And essentially the main difference is that now we can really do at a space and at a scale. So that is the major difference.
Thank you, Guido. That's really helpful. Sarah, do you have anything you wanted to add to what's been said so far?
Not much, except that one of the things that we can gain from doing rules as code this way is that we can use techniques and processes that we as software engineers learn and use in policy development. So we can actually unit test our rules, we can publish our rules into interoperable APIs, we can check for correctness, we can check for consistency, we can even use formal methods if you're really brave. So there's a whole lot of extra techniques that having software engineers and computer scientists and software developers in the room can bring to the day-to-day of policy development and deployment that we can take advantage of here.
Thank you,
I think
Sarah.
everything else I had in mind is covered already.
Thank you, Sarah. And unfairly last, Adrian, because a lot has already been said. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Adrian, you just have to unmute.
Whoopsie. So I was just going to, I was just saying it's pretty much all said, but I mean, I'll take a minute just to kind of reinforce what I think that for me the main themes are, and certainly I think things have improved on the platform side of things. I mean, what Guido says is absolutely correct, that we can now have development tools that non-developers can use to extract propositional logic from base texts. So you need you see an evolving class of legal engineers who are not developers, but can leverage the current advances in technology to actually produce law as code without a C developer or a C++ developer inside. And so that's a major achievement. I mean, that's on the back of a lot of research into platforms and those kinds of development scenarios. But I also think that timing is everything, and I think now people are carrying smartphones around in their pockets, and these are very, very powerful computers. You only have to go back 20 years and you've got something that's as powerful as one of the better computers in the world now in your pocket. And so there's a real appetite out in the real world for applications. You know, I suppose it's like, why can I book online for an aeroplane? Why can't I find out whether I'm liable online? I mean, then that's kind of an evolving culture, if you like, and at some stage you have to recognise that people consume their world digitally, and we need to provide the infrastructure for that. The development infrastructure is there now. After years of research, you can have you know, transparent, and this is a key thing that Pia said, transparent development where you can see from the code as a layperson the relationship between that and the source material, and that's a major step forward for a non-coder person to be able to say, look, I can see the relationship between this development code platform and the source English law. That's a major powerful step forward, I think. And on the demand side, there's certainly a huge appetite out there for anyone who's got a cell phone has an appetite for being able to find out whether they're liable or not. And so I think there's a developing digital ecosystem out there. Governments are involved in it to a large degree because they realise that citizens are becoming more digital. And businesses have always kind of been there. That's why I think financial regulation has always been at the forefront of this. I've always recognised the power of digital computers to automate their compliance regimes. And in some ways it's becoming less bespoke, it's becoming more open, more accessible to the everyday person, if you like, in the sense of developer, but also in the sense of, like, as a citizen, being able to approach this digital technology as well.
Thank you. Pia, did you want to add something to that?
I did, if it's okay. Just
okay.
one. Thank you. I guess just to flesh out a little more the policy transformation side. So right now there is a continuum from policy to implementation in governments everywhere, but Westminster-based governments, this is a particularly siloed activity because of the nature of Westminster-based government. Right now, a lot of policy development in a lot of places happens completely separate intentionally separate from any implementation, from any subject matter expertise, from any frontline, from the people who then need to implement the rules. And just a very small number of experiments around the world have yielded enormous success by taking a multidisciplinary approach to the development of policy in the first place, which Sarah touched on. When you get multidisciplinary policy development that embraces the notion of rules as code as part of the process of developing the policy in the first place, not a translation activity after the fact, which is the traditional approach to rules as code, wait for the legislation to come out, interpret, create a code version. When you actually create this multidisciplinary approach to policy development, you have this amazing opportunity, transformative opportunity to close the policy implementation continuum gap, which currently exists. In countries like France, where they have gone and codified their social welfare and financial taxation rules, like just those rule systems, any change to policy, the new policy proposal has to say, and if I make this change, here is the entire impact, not just the economic impact. Here's which groups of people are suddenly not served or overserved. Here's the impact on quality of life. So rules as code is, I think, part of a broader movement towards digital government, which is not about digitization of government. The traditional approach to rules as code was digitization of our rules. The new approach is about digital transformation, so that we have a digital, that we're embracing, if you like, the digital paradigms and the 21st century, and looking at how we can create government that is suitable and fit for purpose in the 21st century. Rules as code is part of that, legislation, regulation, etc., born digital, so that they are suitable in a digital economy and a digital society. But then there's the other parts of the trust infrastructure, making sure that our approach to data is appropriate and consistent, making sure there are persistent and trustworthy ledgers of decisions, so that you don't get 10 years down the track and then say to a citizen, you need to give us proof of why we paid you this amount of money, otherwise we're going to take it away from you. We need to have those ledgers, and we need to have that trust infrastructure. And finally, like the fourth thing, which I think is going through a revolution, which is part of the same storyline, is what we measure as success. Too long have we measured success as efficiencies and purely financial or economic. Actually shifting to and starting to incorporate measures of human success creates the mechanism to motivate systemically humane outcomes from the work of government. So rules, data, ledgers, records, and measures of human success are these four intersections that are coming together to create 21st century trust infrastructure, so critical as we shift into more AI and machine learning. If we don't get those four things right, we will actually dramatically exacerbate the problems and inequalities of the systems we have today.
Wow, thank you, Pia. That was great. My next question, and I think we've actually covered a lot of this one, is we talked a lot about what rules as code is, and my next question was going to be, well, why do it? But I actually think, Pia, a lot of what you've said really does already answer that question. How does rules as code actually help deliver services, achieve compliance, and other things? I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to what you've already said, or otherwise I can go. Do you want to add anything there?
Well, I mean, I'll just one quick thing, which is this is about government shifting from being reactive to being proactive. When the traditional paradigm of someone's doing the wrong thing and we'll catch them and then we'll prosecute them, those usual, whether it's compliance or intelligence levers that we use to enforce our rules, as it were, are very slow and analog and not really suitable to machines, because a machine is not motivated the same as a person. A machine doesn't care about criminal prosecution or economic sanctions because it's a machine. So really starting to shift that thinking and how rules as code can help us be more proactive in identifying patterns of behavior that are not necessarily human driven is critical. And just very quickly, when I first started this work when I was in AUSTRAC, within months we had the first bank say to us, if you're anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing rules, that just the prescriptive ones, were available to us as an API that we could consume, that we don't have to interpret and translate and copy into our business systems and then keep up to date and then monitor and you know, assure. I just had one bank tell us it would save them 16 million a year. It is not pennies. The government have almost divested our responsibility of assuring one of the few things that we are uniquely responsible for, and that's legislation and regulation. So this creates a mechanism to rectify that that onus that we've put on the economy for no real benefit. And that's all I'll say.
That's great. The one lesson I got from that is that everyone on this panel should be working on commission for a share of those millions of dollars. But Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add about how Rules as Code actually helps deliver services?
Yeah,
and achieving the goals?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're doing software very well, more recently than not, is provenance and being able to tell where something came from and how it came to be. So when the quarantine went horribly wrong in Melbourne, nobody knew who made the rules. The idea of having the co-authorship and the evolution of the rules as a public process would really mitigate problems like that. You could go to Git and say, Git blame this line of code, and you would know why that's there and how it got there. It actually shifts the burden away from the legislators, because they can, at the time of their thinking, put down their thoughts about why a certain thing is the way it is. So it can shift the culture of developing policy to one where you focus on outcomes, to one where you shield yourself against blame. Though that might seem counterintuitive at first. So the provenance and the history of rules and how they came to be is really important. Also, being able to model and simulate the outcomes of putting new rules in place or modifying existing rules. You can say, okay, so if I put this rule in now, how would it affect a single parent with one child aged 7.5 and another aged 22? You can put that in and you can get the outcome, but you can also do it on a population level. So you can say, for this statistical representation of my my community, who would benefit, who would lose out, and by how much. And that by how much is really important as well, because then you can make rules to mitigate those effects if needed. So that the other point that I think Pia touched on a little bit is the compliance cost. The government talks a lot about red tape and how this is slowing down business and it's costing the economy, and they've got all the slogans. But a lot of the compliance cost is not the cost of actually following the rules, it's the cost of understanding the rules. So if we take that away, then suddenly compliance is not so burdensome. That's all I've got to say.
Thanks, Sarah. And I might just provide background for people not in Australia in terms of your example from Melbourne with the COVID rules. So someone had said that it would be private security guards at the COVID hotels. These are the hotels people have to go into quarantine when they arrive in the country. And when this proved to be a problem, no one could remember where that rule even came from. And suddenly everyone in government's going, not us, it wasn't me. And it was somehow a rule that was being implemented, but no one knew who had decided that would be the case. But I just thought I'd give that context in case anyone is not from Australia and listening. So the provenance of rules, your point about understanding where they came from and having, you know, the accountability chains, to use a word Pia used earlier, I think is a really highlights the benefit of rules as code. Adrian, did you have something to add?
Not really. I mean, I analyse it as rules as code helping in two areas. I mean, that's in policy development, which Sarah touched on. I mean, if you've got digital models, then you can start running data against them. And every time we've actually done a project of rules as code, we've actually found flaws in people's logic and thinking as policy developers. So it's just a really useful discipline and also tool for people to develop policy that works in the real world. And also and Pia touched on this, and to me this is the big one. And we've talked to people about this. I hate to say it, it's almost negligent not to have rules as code as a regulator if you want to reach into people's digital lives. I mean, if you're a regulator and you hand over a piece of paper and you get 17 different outcomes from 17 different digital systems, then the answer is obvious to centralise it. And banks are a good example. If you've got one set of rules which have traceable lineage back to real law, they are rules that are code from a centralised source. Then you're actually saving everybody a lot of money and time by giving them something they can integrate to in their own systems, and that's exactly what Pia said. So, no, I don't really have anything to add. I just think that those two things, for me anyway, are the main gains. It's really efficiency gains, really, in the compliance area, and quality and efficiency gains in the modelling and policy development area.
Okay, so in the next question, I want to move, I suppose, from the abstract to the concrete. So we've spoken a lot about what rules as code is, and we've spoken about some of its benefits at a relatively high level. I was wondering if I could ask you to talk about this in the context of specific projects, whether they're current projects or projects you've been involved with in the past, whether they're in Australia, New Zealand or Canada. And Guido, I might start with you.
Oh, okay, thanks. So, well, what I'd like to point out that rule as code, it's helpful not only for the public sector, but also can be used by private organizations to create benefits for their clients. So this is it's a project that's been, well, it started in Data 61 Cyro a few years ago, and I think it's a perfect example of rule as code. So in particular, it's the PaidRight project, where it started as a joint venture between Data 61 and PwC. And the idea was to encode the modern awards, so essentially the regulations about payment and entitlement for workers, and to consider the payrolls and essentially to check for compliance of those payrolls. Well, unfortunately, the Australian system, it's possibly overcomplicated, but this is not what we're going to speak here about payment and worker retribution, but this is not what we want to do. But essentially, what we did, we take the rule as code approach. So essentially, we take legislation and the regulations, the actual textual provisions as first-class citizen, and we model directly. And on top, the guys in PaidRight built a system where they can check payroll for compliance. And now it started as a technology transfer, but now it's a fully commercial avenue, and they have a very good success. So they're able to check in a fraction of time, and it provides a good service, and it improves compliance. We did some other projects on compliance. It was limited to in the telecommunications sector, and again from the private sector, not from the public sector. And well, we estimated that if you have a successful rule as code implementation, then there are huge savings in compliance. So we estimated that there are savings of the order of 30% of compliance costs. Then there are many other projects. We have been working in some other projects that it was more academic at this moment. We were working on a project where, well, we tried to encode some part of the crime code, in particular about spent conviction, so about when people is allowed or is obliged to discharge information about previous convictions. And then this is an example where it could be very, very beneficial, probably from the public sector, because at this moment the crime commissions is processing manually over 5 million requests per year, and over 90% of those requests can be automatically analyzed by a computer in a very effective way and in a fraction of time. So those are the two areas I'd like to touch for this moment for projects.
You're on mute.
Yeah, no, my turn to make that mistake. Thanks, Adrian. Do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Okay. My company is Smart Legal, so don't really want to talk about our commercial engagements and name clients. But the banking sector, banking regulation is an area where the law changes. You need good version control of your basic source material, and you need to have on top of that your logic stack to produce a rules as code API effectively. So banking regulators are obviously very interested in that, and so are the regulated banks, because they want to have certainty from their regulator, and they want to save money by having a code set that is approved effectively for use by the regulator. So and that kind of, if you like, that's a pretty good summation of the whole business. But one that we've just started that is good to talk about is the Citizens Advice Bureau in New Zealand, which is like free advice to citizens effectively. So you ring them up, and quite often law students will be manning the phones, and it's kind of public good lawyering, if you like. So people will have a problem in a particular area, and then these people, the Citizens Advice Bureau, have big manuals effectively of like how to go through the steps of working out and helping people. So we're particularly proud of starting work with them to basically put all their manual rules into digital form, so both the staff and the actual end user can have access to law that's relevant to them as citizens. So yeah, and to me that's one of the reasons why I'm interested in doing this is giving people access to their law. I mean, yes, you've got a library with books in it, but like I said, people are using cell phones, so they need access to their law on as citizens, and it would be remiss not to take full advantage of the power of digital computers, rather than just giving them a web page. Why not take that extra step, and if you can, provide them with an executable code which actually helps, if you like, as an aid to getting to know their actual obligations. So there's a wee list I could go through, so there's also the wonderful project that Nadia Webster at, and this is not mine, so I can talk about this quite happily, at Wellington, although anyway, we won't go into that. Wellington City Council put up a bit of a quite amazing representation of the Wellington City Council district plan. I think it's the best rules of code implementation I've seen. We're very excited about it. And it's worth looking at. I can send a link to that, and I think that they've done a fantastic job. And I think there's a number of projects in the pipeline in New Zealand, and yeah, I'll just leave it there for now. But I recommend having a look at the City Council one. The Plan Tech kind of angle, Resource Management Act type things in New Zealand is actually coming on in leaps and bounds, because it's a new chance, new legislation. People are going to be involved in writing law from scratch, and you can actually incorporate digital from the get-go. And so that's an exciting opportunity. And if you have a look at the City Council website, they've made some major strides in the rules and code area. So yeah, it's good to talk about someone else's success. We'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. You've been on more projects in this area than anyone, I think, in multiple jurisdictions. So I don't know how you'll struggle to come up with a limited number of examples without taking up all the time. But maybe just if you have maybe something recent you're working on in Canada as an example.
Cool. I guess that there's a couple of key categories where this is really pertinent. We've spoken, the panel's spoken about compliance a bit, so I might actually stick to service delivery. I like Adrian, I do recommend the team Wellington Council. I know many of them very well. They're doing amazing work. So service delivery is what I'm going to focus on, and the relationship between policy and service delivery. In Canada, the job that I have there, working for Service Canada, which is the Canadian equivalent to Service New South Wales, if anyone's interested, my role is to, we've set up a team to design, deliver, and then operate the first digital channel, fully fleshed digital channel for Service Canada. And the interesting thing is the moment you're doing any form of service delivery that puts the user at the center, that actually tries to design a holistic service for citizens, you inevitably are going across different legislative portfolios, different acts, different service registers, different departments. You are inevitably trying to make simple the complex web of spaghetti, which is usually in some state of machinery of government flux. That is government, trying to make that simple and easy for citizens to get what they need and what they are entitled to, and what they need from us. So rules as code is it's really interesting. You only really have a couple of ways of doing this. You can say, okay, well, all of the business systems that exist, we could create a translation layer that tries to get them all to talk to each other, which is painful and hard, possible, but really, really hard and not particularly sustainable. Your second option is to just bounce the person around lots of different systems, which is obviously not ideal. So then you start thinking about what is actually the sustainable way to get a single view of eligibility, of entitlement, of what is relevant to you as a person. And it very quickly becomes the case that legislation is, legislation is where you find those rules. It's where you find those. Quite often you find not just the eligibility rules, the prescriptive and judgment-based eligibility rules, but you also find very clear calculations, usually written in some ungodly prose that you've got to deconstruct. My proudest moment of recalling year 7 grade mathematics was the realization that a particular rebate in New Zealand was actually a quadratic equation. And what was interesting was when we encoded it, we found that the amount that we got was different than the business systems. So we checked ourselves 20 times, as you would assume, but it really showed a problem. There are a lot of rules encoded in business systems in service delivery all around the world, and I see this everywhere I go and work with, and the business system is considered authoritative. But the fact is that the legislation is actually authoritative. And so if the business system is out of sync with the legislation, that's a major, major problem. So in this particular case, we discovered that we asked, if we could see the code of the business system, which we were told no, but here's the spreadsheet that we built that off. And so we looked at the spreadsheet and we found that they'd broken it down into a series of macros, and halfway through the calculation, they had rounded a number down for the purpose of simplicity, and they were mispaying people. And one of the things I love about New Zealand, and I am back in Aotearoa right now, is that when we pointed this out, we were told, well, are we overpaying or underpaying people? We said, you're overpaying, and they said, oh, that's all right then. And my heart melted, and I thought, oh, this is the country I need to live in. In Canada, it's the same. If we want to provide a holistic service, we need to make the rules available, but not in code, but not just make it available. We want to make it so that any citizen getting or trying to get a service should be able to say, I want to know why. I want to know why I was eligible. I would want to know why I wasn't eligible. I want to see a record of that. I want to understand. And I want to know that if I want to appeal this decision, that I can. So we want to be able to, as a government, I think we always talk about auditability and traceability for the purpose of our own internal auditing. But we've got to stop saying to people, trust us because we're the government, and figuring out and trying to say how much do they trust us, and that becomes our guardrails. We need to start figuring out how to make our processes more trustworthy. And rules as code helps with that because legislation as code, which is far more profound and interesting than rules as code, provides that authoritative, whether it's a service being delivered or a chatbot or any form of interaction with the citizen, I should be able to validate that what is being provided to the citizen is lawful, is in line with the law. And right now that is almost impossible, because the irony for all of our compliance and regulatory functions in government is we don't regulate ourselves. The business analysts analyze the legislation and the operational policy and come up with the functional requirements that then gets batted over the fence to technology, to IT or whatever you want to call the particular department, who then implement it because they're not the business owners. They just have to implement whatever they're told. There is no check and balance, and the checks and balances, well, there sometimes are, but over time it certainly gets more and more messy, and you get a Frankenstein of systems and rules just cobbled together with a little bit of thread, and it's very, very difficult to be able to draw a line from what's happening here back through to the authoritative source. So in Service Canada, we are looking at and trying to capture the legislation as code around services, around benefits, around work and income. We are also working with some of the regulators that are in our same agency around doing rules as code from the start, doing the better rules process to new regulations. So there is a project happening next month, but the Canadian School of Public Service, of which there's no equivalent in Australia that I can think of. In New Zealand, the public the policy project is probably the closest, but they heard about rules as code from a presentation I gave in Canada 3 or 4 years ago, and they've gone full on. They've actually got a huge amount of projects, particularly around regulation and compliance. I think there's a family member coming in. So they've done heaps of work in Canada, and I do recommend, and I'll provide some links to some of the experiments and that they've done. They've got their own user group, so I'd suggest that this community of practice connects with that community of practice. There's some really, really good stuff happening. And the realization in Canada that policy transformation is the natural conclusion of this work, not just rules as code, which is quite exciting. So yeah, continuing to do the good work over there, and everyone in implementation immediately gets it, because they know how painful it is to try to keep systems up to date with continually changing rules, and the issues that creates. So the final quick thing I'll say is, it's still, like, France is still my favorite example, but nowhere has done this fully systemically yet. France has done the codification, but it's all done after the fact. The creating rules as code from the start, the born digital rules that have a human and machine version from the start. The best work I've seen in that is certainly New Zealand, and there's some in Australia too. But it's very new around the world. And just to answer one of the questions that's come up on the Q&A, this is not about replacing the due process of law. This is not about technologists, becoming the lawmakers by any stretch. It is about, to Sarah's earlier point, leveraging some of the tools at our disposal to help ensure that we get good human language rules, legislation and regulation in the case of government, that is implemented in a consistent and common way by providing a technical reference implementation that can be leveraged across the economy, including by departments themselves. I don't believe that we would want to see Parliament approve code. I personally believe that the Parliament would always approve the human language version. And I say human language because in Canada that's 2 languages, so adding code is just a 3rd language. But the human language is still where the authority is, from my perspective. The machine version becomes the reference implementation, the authoritative reference implementation, to assure transparency and traceability and consistent application, and the ability to monitor the implementation of those rules in across the economy. So I'll stop there. Oh, sorry, one last thing. We have built, and for those that know me, you'll know how exciting this is, we have built a first policy difference engine in Canada. It's very early days, and there's we've got a Code for Canada team working with us on this, so they're going way out further than what a lot of other people are comfortable, which is great. And it was just really exciting to be able to see real prototyping of for this piece of legislation, if you make this change, here's not just the cost impact, but the community impact, the user impact, and the policy outcomes impact. So there's a lot of very exciting work coming down the pipeline. So I'm very excited about this community of practice about to be launched, because there's a lot to share.
Thanks, Pia. So just so I understand it, that's policy modelling sort of built into the same engine as the rules.
Well, it's a couple of things. First of all, policy modelling has always been around, as anyone in this space will tell you. The difference here is, and this is quite profound, and this is one of the ways that we are trying to bridge policy implementation gap, is if the same rules and data and systems and registers, if the same infrastructure that's being used for service delivery is also being leveraged simultaneously for policy infrastructure, suddenly you don't have a gap. You don't have one version of the rules implemented in your policy modelling and another version of the rules implemented in reality. You actually have the same rules being leveraged by service delivery and policy, which means you get a better chance of your modelling reflecting reality, but not just that, being able to then monitor for change and understand the real impact of change as it is actually implemented. So it's quite, like our hypothesis in our team in Canada is, if you have common infrastructure and common, if you like, service components, which includes rules as code necessarily, then that actually creates a necessary bridge between policy and implementation that simply doesn't exist today.
Thank you. That was helpful as an explanation. Sarah, I'm going to go to you now. So you're an engineer, and I'm wondering a little bit about the sort of process, I suppose, from an engineer's perspective of a rules as code project. In other words, how it moves from conception through development to deployment, and where the challenges lie, those sort of practical challenges you might have already encountered in some of the ones you've been involved in.
Yeah, so just for some background, I was recently involved in doing a few rules as code projects in the New South Wales government, and I'm helping out a little bit with the Canadian one at the moment. So I think the main point is that rules as code is not a product. It's not something you can buy. It's not something that you can set and forget. It's a process, and it's an ongoing process forever. So the first thing that you need is the right people. You need people, you need the engineers to sit with the policy people and work together. You need to have the domain specialists that can help interpret the rules. And you need to have the maintenance infrastructure so that each project is not a big mountain to climb. If you've got the infrastructure in place, you can just sit down, do a Git clone and get on with it. It makes it much less cumbersome and much more accessible when you have that framework in place. And that framework is both a tool set and a process. So you need to have all your documentation, you need to have all your process documented and accessible to the people, to the practitioners. But you also have to have the tools, you need to have the testing infrastructure, you need to have the continuous integration infrastructure, just like any other code project. You also need to be able to train people to do it, because having a team of 2 or 3 is not scalable. So in order to be able to actually do this on a wide scale for all policy in all government, you need to be able to train policy people to write the rules this way. And that sounds really terrifying, but it's not. We actually did it. For the energy saving scheme, we had a policy person, Liam McCann, who is awesome, sit with us and learn how to write Python in a few days. And he went off and he implemented the entire energy saving scheme, well, one part of it, and has become a big evangelist for the process in his department. So being able to train people and being able to have that continuity is extremely important. So the last thing is the better rules approach. So having a circular approach where at the moment most policy is done in a very linear fashion. Somebody, usually a member of the government, decides some rule has to go in place, then a bunch of policy people beaver away and write some English or other language document that says this is the policy, and then suddenly everybody else in the world has to implement it. But this having circular, this sort of loop back where you write a bit of policy and then you test to see if it's fit for purpose. And then you write a little bit more policy and you test whether it's fit for purpose, like agile in its true sense, is the key to both having better rules and better policies and better legislation, but also having a much smaller chunk of work, because you're not faced with an enormous corpus and told to go and codify that now. See you in a week, see you in 3 months, see you in 10 years. It's happening as you go. So it's a much smaller, contained, tractable problem. And oh, sorry, I said that's the last thing, but there is one last thing that I want to say. And this is for the people in government. This will uncover bugs in your rules. So you have to have the capacity there to go and fix these problems, the loopholes that are uncovered, the ambiguities, the inconsistencies that come out of this process. There has to be an openness in accepting that these things happen and having processes in place where they can be fixed. So it's an attitude shift in many ways.
Okay, we're getting close to when we need to move on to the Q&A. So I'm going to run through these next few questions quite quickly if I can. Maybe if just everyone can state really quickly, and there's been some questions in the Q&A as well about problems around transparency and, you know, the risks of hidden code, if you like. But if I can get everyone just to state very briefly which platform you use or prefer, if you use multiple platforms or have experimented with them, and why. Pia, do you want to start?
The problem is that, can you hear me? Yep. The problem is that you've given us the other one though, so I'm going to answer both of the questions. On the transparency thing, I want to be super clear. There is no transparency today. Actually, the point of this is to try to mitigate the lack of transparency in current business systems. Getting legislation as code available publicly, even as an authoritative reference implementation, and everyone that needs to use those rules talking to that API will improve the transparency of how rules are implemented today. The lack of transparency right now means there is a lot of black box decision making. The legislation might say you need to be paid monthly, but the business system is a 50-year-old thing that, you know, that calculates it every 6 months because that's how it was hard coded and no one can find a COBOL programmer anymore. This is about mitigating the transparency issue. Now, platforms, I mean, there's lots. I think I have yet to find something more useful for what I do than OpenFisca, the French government's tool. But there's lots, and frankly, a lot of the low-code tools that actually can sit on any rules as code system, I'm finding really interesting as a mechanism for engaging drafters, because it's not just about policy and implementation. Policy takes their time that they need. Quite often drafters are given a day or hours or a couple of days to actually translate some pretty crazy instructions at times into legislation. And that's a really hard job. So this is also about helping the drafters get better outcomes from their work as well. So, so from a platform's perspective, it almost doesn't matter. Think about the process, that process of getting multidisciplinary approach, and don't get too caught up on which tools and platforms. Just use something that works right now, because it's going to take years for some of these standards to become normalized, but you can get some of the benefits and value from it right now.
Okay, well, I might just ask everyone else on the panel then quickly, is there a different view on platforms, or do people agree with Pia, it doesn't really matter?
Can I just add to that? any encoding is better than none. So if you've got your rules in a computer language, it's much easier, generally speaking, to translate from a computer language to another one than to translate from English to a computer language. That's not universally true, but it's the general direction. And while OpenFISCA which is what I've been using, is not perfect, there are certainly technical challenges with it. It's the most popular and mature and easy to use system that I've encountered. So you can always translate it into something else later, but let's do what we can do now.
Guido, do you have any thoughts on everyone using different platforms?
Yes, so I would say, first of all, on one side, what platform it's used at the end, after you have the implementation, probably doesn't matter for some way computers works. However, from an external point of view, it's really, really important. So what you have to do, definitely you can use any programming language. As I said, say Sarah, it's better than nothing. But here we have some other requirements. We have to use some platforms where essentially do enable transparency. They have a representation which is independent of the way at the end it's going to be implemented. And then essentially we have to work and possibly to have some standards where you can represent the logical structure of the legislation. So it is easier to maintain. It is easier to understand what it's on. And also it's very, very important that the representation one select, because not many people are able to read C++ code. Not many people are able to understand what it's written in OpenFISCA. How can we achieve transparency if people are not able to understand? So what we propose is to have some languages that allows us to represent legislation in a language which is neutral. It's closer to the language in which legislation are written, and essentially it's at the same time understandable by humans and processable by machine. So essentially, well, we propose that to use some logic-based approach. And then the other really important part is to then try to adhere as much as possible to standards. Some standards have been developed for the representation of legal knowledge. Here, just want to mention Acomantoso, which is about the representation of the structure of the legal documents, and also legal UML. Both are standards proposed by OASIS, which is the body who was behind the standard for OpenOffice. And then essentially, they are a good starting point. They are not perfect. There are some problems. But I would say we have to have standards so we can have interoperability. And it's very important that once you have a representation and encoding of the legislation, it should be possible to use different systems. And then if we don't adopt common standard, that interoperability will be very, very, very hard.
Thanks, Guido. Adrian, did you have anything to add on this question of platforms, standards, integration?
I do indeed. I think that Guido has pretty much hit it on the head there. He's hit the nail very firmly on the head. I've written, we use a language called LogLaw, which is a structured language that captures in a computer language agnostic way the logic and meaning of a statute. And we've had people learn it within 2 hours, university graduates with no computer experience whatsoever. And this comes to Guido's point. You need to have a transparent language which you can trace semantically and syntactically back to the original source code. And in our case, a Acomantoso all the way, legal rules ML all the way, as representations of the base statute. Fantastic standards. We're working with Monica Palmerani, Unibo, and we've been introduced to Guido recently. So we're big fans of that. And on top of that, what we do is we extract the logic from these representations in a computer language agnostic way. It allows transparent evaluation of what we call isomorphism, which is the congruence between the base law and computer code. And if you can prove that, the computer code is the same as the law in effect, then we have genuine rules as code. And the only way you can actually credibly do this is if humans can, and not technical humans, not big brain C++ people, normal humans can actually verify for governance purposes that the code and the law are the same. And log law, which is a simple structured language, allows you to go from the source to code, because log law itself is compilable, and we can compile that into Python. We can compile that into OpenFisca, because it's a neutral, language neutral representation of the logic of the law. And so I actually think platforms are crucial. I don't think you can just say, no, platforms aren't important, because unless you have the right platform, you will not have transparency. What you will have is computer programmers using OpenFisca and C+ to obfuscate and bamboozle the everyday governance person, which from my experience is not an IT person. It's the minister, it's the policy holder, it's the lawyers, it's the people that are not technical, and they need to have confidence that there is what we call isomorphism between the source material and the computer output. And the only way you can do that is not the only way, but the best way is to use log law, which is an intermediate language that you can transparently trace back to the source code and source law and forward to the source code. And so, yeah, I think I'm just amplifying what Guido says, and says that yes, we have that platform and we call it log law, and we base it on international standards such as Akobo Ntoso. We're hoping one day that log law will become some kind of international standard in its own right. A little bit of a plug for my own work there. But yeah, so there you go. That's my thoughts.
Thank you. Hold on. What happened there? Something disappeared from my screen. Can everyone hear me? Yes, good. I think, yes, okay. And I'm picking up some of the questions in the chat here, but sort of linking it into what I was going to ask anyway. So one thing that I've observed, in particular, it's come up a little bit in Australia, is skepticism about rules as code, particularly from the legal community. So the argument is essentially, I'm trying to capture it, and this is lots of different ways of putting it, that code, computer code, no matter what language, no matter what platform, no matter what kind of logic you're using, can never represent the complexities nor the open-endedness of law. So, for example, a computer can't decide what is fair or reasonable, which one would otherwise maybe use some sort of impressionistic human evaluative mode of deciding, to the extent that law is made up not of rules but principles, sort of more open-ended concepts. How does you tell a computer, what to do in a sort of code language? In other words, is there a concern, should lawyers be worried that rules as code might sort of force law into a very different mold, if you like, from the way in which it currently operates? Adrian, do you want to go first, Adrian, on that one, and then Pia?
I think Guido has some thoughts on that one as well. I'll just go really quickly, because I get asked this question a lot, and I've been dealing with it for a long time. I'm a lawyer. I'm also a drafter, as well as a computer coder, and anyway, so I'm very concerned about the law being accurately represented in code. The point here is that there is an algorithm, and law is an algorithm, and computers can represent algorithms, right? So the example I use is, well, you might not be able to tell a computer what's fair and algorithmize that, but you create a black spot where you have limits. There are limits, there's no doubt about it. You can come up with what is fair, and you can algorithmize that, because law fundamentally and all rules are conditional, and the propositional content of rules actually defines them as rules. A rule is propositional content. There is no difference between propositional content and law in the dimension that we're talking about. The point being here is that what is fair will have its own set of rules. You may or may not know them, and you may or may not want to delve into them as a computer, so as a computer algorithm. So that's okay. You can leave a black spot there, and you can say, well, there's some things that computers can't do. Go and ask Guido, go and ask Pia what fair is. That's still an algorithm. It's still a computer algorithm. The computer stops and says, I need input from, and that's still part of the algorithm in itself. You can build out what is fair, as well. Fair by agreement might be what Guido says, but not what Pia says. It might be represented by any number of surrogates that you are happy to use as data points, and that's really what it comes down to. There will be a set of data points that you will allow the computer to use, and some of them might well be impossible to answer at some point for a computer, and at some point there will have to be human intervention. I don't think you're removing interpretation. I think what you're doing is highlighting the places where interpretation is needed, because there are limits on what computers can do and what you can give to them in terms of algorithms. So it's kind of like, it's not a bug, it's a it's not a bug, it's a feature. I mean, you can see it as either, I think. But yes, there certainly are limits, and yeah. And I don't see that necessarily as a defect. All it says is that at some point you say, I'm not using the computer to decide this, but I might use it to decide what 5 + 4 equals, or whether it's a dog. I mean, it can be very good at identifying dogs, it can be very good at identifying other factual scenarios. But yeah, judgment ones, maybe you leave that for other people, but that doesn't in any way take away from the actual ability to create an algorithm which has that slot in it for human intervention. Yeah.
Pia and then Guido on this one.
Okay, so it's really interesting because generally people that make this point fall into a couple of categories. The first category is people that don't seem to realise that business systems encode these things today, and so all the problems that they say that this will create already exist. But then the second category, which is absolutely valid, is people who are concerned about overreach, people who are concerned about entrenching bias in machines, or concerned about losing, to Adrian's point, judgment in the process, or automating, justice somehow, which I don't think I and the teams I work with am absolutely not interested in that. But it's worth pointing out that I think there's been this misunderstanding, like over the last couple of decades. We saw regulation and legislation, for that matter, veer away from prescriptive rules into judgment-based rules. And this notion of principles-based regulation and legislation became very fancy and fashionable. And people suddenly started saying, oh, let's not have anything that's prescriptive, let's just have principles, because principles are better. And the problem is that principles requires interpretation. If you want interpretation, if you want to have diversity in or inconsistency in your implementation because you're trying to allow for judgment, then that's fine. And there are areas where that makes sense. But if you want to have consistency in implementation, such as some of the areas around financial regulation, such as, is this person actually eligible or not? And a very simple example of that is in New South Wales, actually, one of the jobs Sarah and I were working on. They were saying, okay, well, a child is eligible for this, well, a family is eligible for a child's benefit once they hit 4.5. And we said, what do you mean by that? Do you mean 365 divided by 2? Do you mean 6 months? Do you mean 26 weeks? And the gap in between those is only a few days, but that's thousands or tens of thousands of families that are or aren't eligible based on that interpretation. So just a very base, and we had the same thing in New Zealand with the Holidays Act. How things are translated, if you want it to be consistently translated, you need to be prescriptive. So the answer here is not to say principles are bad, the answer here is to say be careful where you use judgment. Basically, use principles where you want to have interpretation, where you want to have judgment based. But if you want it to be clear and consistently applied, please keep it clear. Please use prescriptive rules, and then we would get a balance, because and Australia just does this all the time. We veer from one end right to the other, and it just becomes this stupid pendulum. So what we need to do is take a mature approach to our legislation, to our regulation, and to say where we want, let's be clear. When we want specifics, let's be specific, and when we want judgment, we want based judgment. And then to Adrian's point, in terms of how it's codified, a person should be able to know if they meet the eligibility criteria for a benefit or a service before we force them to come in for an interview. Because the interview, and a classic example of this is citizenship test, and we did this in New Zealand as well. A citizenship test, there are certain absolutely critical prescriptive rules that you have to meet before you go in for the good character test. The good character test you're probably never going to automate, but you do want to make sure that you're not wasting both the time of the interviewer, of the agent, and the time of the citizen by getting a person to come in when they're not actually eligible. So front loading some of those eligibility requirements means that you can not waste people's time as much, both in service delivery and on the client's side. And it can also actually lead to people being able to make better judgment calls in planning their own life. I'm only going to be eligible for this if I earn $200 less a year. Is it worth it? No. Well, that's all right. Or yes, then I'm going to work, a week less this year. So, yeah.
Can I add a little bit to what Pia just said?
Yeah, sorry.
When you have prescriptive rules for things that should be prescriptive rules, you are making it more democratic, because if you have rules that have judgments or have complexities where there shouldn't be complexities, you are favoring those people who have the legal expertise to be able to find the holes, to find the ways around them. And that applies whether it's planning rules or social benefits. If you have if you have the capability of getting around the rules, then you do get around the rules, and that obviously favors the people with the more capability rather than everybody equally. And that's like, you don't get anything other than favoring people with the biggest pocket, the deepest pockets.
And
when
in
you have
regulate
such rules.
Sorry, I was going to say in regulation, it also creates a benefit of the incumbent. The large companies that can afford, with deep pockets to afford compliance, are going to be at a benefit, at an advantage to small companies trying to enter a market. So, and even when we're at AUSTRAC, there are certain exemptions that reveal themselves over time. So you can, over time, because of the rule of precedent, start to codify well-defined precedents. But but you wouldn't necessarily do that. But there are some opportunities there. I'll stop there, but hopefully that's been helpful in addressing that concern. And thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it. It is absolutely improves accessibility when you reduce the complexity and effort to interpret and apply the rules, for sure.
I'll be quick. So I fully second what has been said so far about this topic. Now, what I want to add is then, well, actually, having ambiguity offers some benefits and creates some opportunities for the law profession and similar domains. So we want to have some ambiguities, and then those are part of the legislation, and essentially, well, in those cases, as Adrian said, ask a human. And that is absolutely fine. But then it's where having ULOS code can create a secondary market where essentially additional company, private sector, can create the specific interpretation for their customers. They can use precedents to determine, yes, so in those previous cases where fair dealing with copyright was defined in this and this way. And then if you do that way, we have way to resolve that particular opportunity. You can use, as an external party, you can create an additional database to fill those gaps. And then if you can't, just ask the human. And on final things on prescriptive and versus principle-based. Now here we have kind of a paradox. Prescriptive regulations could be much harder to encode. Unfortunately, we did a couple of experiments on building constructions on New Zealand building constructions. It was a nightmare, absolutely prescriptive. It was a nightmare to encode. We were able to do it. On the other side, a principle base could be absolutely easy to implement because essentially you just have to rule, follow this principle here. But then it will be absolutely hard when you want to apply in an automated way because you have to provide a huge amount of data to determine what is the interpretation of those principles. So easier to encode, but harder to use, harder to encode, but easier to use, in addition to all, as has been said by the other panelists so far.
Thanks, Guido. And that actually feeds into the next question I was going to ask you, which is the main challenges to adoption and scale. So obviously, you've mentioned an example there in terms of if you have lots of principles, you know, it might be easy to write, but you've got a real challenge if you actually want this system in production making decisions. But what are some of the other challenges to adoption and scale of systems?
Well, the first one is to translate the legislation from textual provision to the actual, rule as code. So that is a task that it's doable. It can be done. So we had a couple of experiments. We had an experiment, for example, with QT, where students were able to encode some piece of Australian Commonwealth legislation. They did a perfect job, but it's time consuming. So Drafter can help writing legislation in the proper way. Also, it will be good if the legislations will be drafted at the same time in natural language and as rule as code. That will save a lot of time. Then the other aspect is then, well, when you work with legislation, you work in a society. So essentially, you cannot just concentrate as rule as code, but you have to build an infrastructure on top. So essentially, you have to build an institutions where you can build the system. So you have to know how the system is going to be used. You have to have some mechanism in place to recover some possible mistakes. You have to have some testing. You have to deploy. You have to go on social aspect to convince people to use it, and so on. And finally, also it will be political, and well, it will be good if there will be a mandate from Drafter to write both legislation in natural language and to have an interpretation provided as rule as code.
Thank you, Guido. I'm going to sort of skip over the other questions I was going to ask because we have an amazingly wonderful and rich set of questions from the audience. So I'm going to shift over to those. I also encourage all the speakers just to dive in, and I know some of you already have, and give your answers to the ones that you think you have an answer to, just to type in. But maybe if I just sort of go through some of them that we have time for. So there's one question here about government capabilities for rules as code. What I mean, and Pia, maybe this one's for you because you've worked across very different governments. What do you think governments currently do have the capabilities to run these projects, or particular governments are ahead of others?
Every government that I have worked in, every government that I have interacted with has the most amazing human capital and potential to do extraordinary things. The problem usually is the leadership's appetite for enabling, empowering and supporting the public servants to do anything. So my answer to that is actually humans are capable of the most extraordinary things, and even with decades of hollowing out and ideological pressure on governments to do nothing, like so many public servants in every government that I've worked in are committed and skilled and empathetic and have the possibility to do things. It's not to say that government should do it on our own. We absolutely should be partnering, collaborating, and frankly, working openly is the best way to partner in this kind of work, because then it isn't about just this company or that company or this institution. It actually becomes more collaborative. But I have no doubt, and I have seen it, and I have seeded it, and I have sparked it in several places now, and it always leads to the most profound and interesting constellations of projects kicking off and taking root. So yeah, so the real trick is whether the leadership have the appetite for it. And what's interesting there is, generally speaking, and Adrian, like, let me know what your thoughts on this are, but generally speaking, the tax departments already have something closer to this sort of better rules process in other departments, and because they work with finances and the constant link between policy and implementation that you see in those agencies tends to make this a more natural fit. The regulators have a big appetite for it because they see the pain and the issue and the exponential problem space that they're trying to deal with growing faster than their resource, or they're usually declining resources at their availability. So they're looking for and are desperate for innovative ways to try to regulate a exponentially growing economy and problem space. The service delivery agencies they get it at the operational level, but it's not necessarily seen as a, but sometimes there's a fight because, you know, you'll have internal rules teams fighting with internal rules teams and it just becomes a bit of a religious fight, but there's definitely capability there. I guess when I come back to say leadership, the vision for what digital government means internationally is not consistent. In some places, it's simply about digitizing things. It's simply about taking us, you know, a percentage better, a slightly better efficiency, a slightly better process or automation. The key thing that's missing right now is that genuine vision, and you know, some of us have it, but that genuine vision for what reimagining government in the 21st century looks like. A digital twin for government doesn't just mean a digitized version of an 18th century paradigm. It necessarily means, how do we be the best public service we can be in a completely new world than we were invented in? We have 18th century, 17th, 16th century processes that people keep trying to just encode, and it's not working. It's not fast enough, it's not responsive enough, it doesn't scale. And when we talk about scalability, people often think about processing power. It's about scaling our impact, and it will not happen unless there is an appetite for genuine, systemic transformation of our public sectors to be 21st century fit for purpose.
Thanks, Pia. So I'm going to put a couple of questions together. I don't know who wants to grab this one. Sort of related to the question I asked earlier, which is the concern that rules as code might lead to a kind of checklist type approach to compliance, or might prevent, you know, differential treatment of maybe large corporations and small corporations. So currently there might be sort of more discretion or forgiveness in one sector, but, you know, much more sort of tight compliance for, you know, banks and large organisations and so forth. But rules as code might uniformitize things in a negative way. Is there a concern that rules as code, and I know, Pia, you've mentioned a few times, we already have these systems, so it's not that rules as code is the first time we're creating them, but is there a sense in which rules as code could create a sort of checklist or simplistic or more uniform in a bad way approach to compliance?
Can I have a go at that one?
Yeah, you go, Sarah. Sorry.
Well, yes, but is that a bad thing? Because if there is a definite way ahead, if there is a rule and you can check whether you comply with the rule, and you can simulate and model the exact rule, not just an interpretation of the rule, not an approximation of the rule, but the exact rule across a population, then you can make direct, thought out you can have direct thought out measures to mitigate those disadvantages. So wouldn't it be better that your rule explicitly says that companies of a certain size will have these rules apply to them, and then companies of a different size will have these other rules apply to them, and that is made explicit, and it's not up to a human judge or a human policy, I don't know, executor, I don't know what the technical term for such a person is, but basically a public servant deciding whether this rule should apply to this person and this other rule should apply to this other person or entity. I think making it explicit actually makes it more democratic and makes it better rather than worse.
And for cases where you want judgment, to the earlier point, you maintain judgment. But let's be super clear. How compliance is working today is compliance and regulatory teams have had a decreasing amount of resource over many years, and right now they can't, so they shifted from assessing to self-assessments, then they shifted from 100% assurance to 90% to 80% to 10%. Nowadays, there's more money going into trying to do the risk assessment models to figure out which 10% we should focus our efforts on of the sector, because we can't afford to actually keep everyone, in check. So this actually would take us back to being able to understand compliance, because the problem now isn't the big infringers. The problem is the million of small infringers. The problem isn't when one bank is not compliant and creates a risk. The problem is a million self-creating bots that can stand themselves up as as fake companies, as Phoenix AIs, and you get a cascading almost never-ending internal loop of crime that's not able to be found by a human. So
okay, but Pia, that feeds into actually one of the other questions, which is, does rules as code lead to sort of a shift towards a kind of social credit rating system? So everyone, the sort of full, the uniform compliance challenge. Yep,
and this is where, and again, as a society, so Australia and New Zealand are interesting because, having come from Australia, having lived in New Zealand a few years, I do not pretend to represent either fully, but I'll reflect an interesting observation about one of the big differences. New Zealand, and it's not fully implemented yet, but they adopted a thing called the wellness framework. They have the basic concept that you don't just measure economic capital, but you need to measure and track the impact on human capital, social capital, and natural capital, as well as financial capital. Australia doesn't have that yet. So here's the thing. The social credit system, any form of credit system, right now, today, because the only thing we measure is financial impact, we are, right now, unintentionally, across the whole economy, benefiting and favouring economic impact or economic return over human return. We are not prioritising the impact on humans above money. We are prioritising the impact of money above humans systemically in Australia. That started to shift in New Zealand. It's starting to shift in Canada. It's starting to shift in lots of countries who have recognised that how you measure, and we all know this, how you measure drives how you perform. And right now, our measurement system is perversely driving the wrong outcomes for our societies, or at least some of the wrong outcomes for our societies. This is why we have YouTube bots that scrape YouTube and then create generic content, which is just a mashup of whatever's popular today. That's how we got Peppa Pig snuff videos, because there was a beheading video and a Peppa Pig video, mash it up with all the right tags, and kids just click through. And it sounds appalling and awful, but from a financial motivated system, that's what happens. I would love to see a system where we put in place and we choose, and only government's in the position to do this for the whole economy, where we put in place the measures that means that even a nefarious AI would naturally be incentivized to, set up a good business, pay its people minimum wage, actually have a positive impact on society, not just the economy. So we need to shift our measures of success, and rules as code isn't going to make that better or worse. Rules as code without that shift will probably exacerbate it, but no more than it's exacerbated today, because it's already in place today as a problem. So we need to shift, and I said this at the very beginning, we need to shift to rules that are more traceable, transparent, accessible, and that you can see how they're implemented in business, in software, not just in human speak. We need to have the transparent and accountable approach to data, to how decisions are logged and tracked and available to citizens, and we need to have the measures of success to be updated, to be focusing on human measures of success, not just economic measures of success. Those are the 4 things that we need to do to actually create a trustworthy government, to create trust infrastructure. Any one of them without the others will probably continue to amplify what we already have.
Thank you, Pia. Okay, maybe, but we're going to have to wind up soon and go to the next segment, which is the introduction to the to the new community of practice. But before we do, I might just give each of the speakers an opportunity, if you like, for a last word, whether there's a question that you've seen on the chat that you wanted to answer, whether I rushed you on an earlier point, or whether you wanted to highlight a point that someone else has made or that you've made that you really want people to take home. So I'm going to go from left to right on my screen. Sarah, do you want to start?
Okay. I think transparency and accountability are really the most important things here. We're not advocating machine learning or getting computers to do what humans do. We are advocating making the rules actually better and fairer, and having ways to measure if they are better, and having ways to measure if they are fair, and having ways to evaluate the laws themselves. At the moment, that doesn't exist, other than in the very limited cases that such systems have been implemented. So what we are proposing really shouldn't make anything worse, but it's a step for progress towards a fairer, better state, I hope. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Thank you. Guido?
Okay, so, well, my final statement will be, well, definitely we have to use EULA's code. And, well, we have to realize that there have been over 50 years of research in how to represent the legal knowledge and how to represent legal reasoning. So what I'd like to propose and what I'd like to suggest people working in this area, look at what has been done. Most of the things that didn't work, we know what didn't work, we know what does work. Definitely there is hope for new innovation. And finally, if you want to go, then you have to implement. My recommendations will be look at what has been done and work on languages that are at the same time conceptual, allows for understandability by human, but also for being able to be processed by computers.
Thank you. Adrian, you're on mute.
I'm 100% on the same page as Guido right there. For me, transparency and governance are just key issues, and the only way you can really get there, I think, is if you have a language that is readable by humans and by computers, and not just by extremely clever humans. So I think that really is the key message for me, is that rules as code is something that's going to drive huge efficiencies in the digital world, and it needs to have transparent governance and as much automation as humanly possible to put into it, and that involves a considered look at the technology stacks, the standards that you need to use to get there, and finally, this is something we haven't touched on. Integration into those digital systems is very important. It actually answers a few questions that have come up along the way, such as what is fair. I mean, you can integrate systems together to say what counts as. If you've got data sources and syncs that you can attach to rules as code, that's an important criteria, I think, for any successful project, is to have the ability to integrate it into current digital environments. That's really important. And I'd put it out a plea for, as Guido said, languages that are interpretable by humans and by computers, and as a means to provide transparency. Yeah. So I think there's a whole lot of building blocks out there, and I think that the technology is improving all the time. There's automation from source material through to production of logic. There's all sorts of things going on out there, which is making it easier and easier to do, and the benefits are just, I think, quite obvious. Yeah.
Thank you. Pia.
I guess my final word is a couple of things. First of all, we need to collectively think about what we're trying to achieve here, and what a good future state looks like for society, and what role all our sectors need to play. I'm kind of sick of the public sector being seen as being nothing better for nothing than being a glorified piggy bank. We need a cross-sector approach to this, which isn't just about government paying other people to do the work, but a government being part of the solution and public servants being in the room with different sectors, and that genuine collaboration towards a better future state is critical. We need to look at what the trust infrastructure is for the digital economy and digital society so that we don't leave people behind or indeed push them down. And the final thing I'll say is I'm really delighted about another community practice starting up across Australia and New Zealand. I really look forward to working with a lot of you on the post-101 questions and conversations. There's people around the world that have been thinking quite deeply about these things for years now. And we, while these conversations are really good and interesting, and it's good to see more people getting an interest, what we really need to do is actually have the next level of conversations. And if we start from the premise that we're all actually trying to get a more fair and equitable and good outcome for society, then that might actually help bypass some of the usual assumptions that we're just trying to take over, and get us towards that next level, that maturation of this idea collectively. So I really look forward to having those, grade 2 or grade 3 conversations with everyone, and getting into the maturation of this space moving forward. So we can draw a line in the sand at some point in the hopefully near future and start actually applying a better rules approach to all of our legislation and regulation in government for the benefit of the digital economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia. And that's a really lovely place to close off, because if I was going to say what my sort of wrap up is from this event, I suppose it fits in quite well with that. I think we've covered off sort of some of the sort of beginner questions. What is it? What is it for? How does it work? What are some of the challenges? And also, I suppose, dealt with some of the sort of familiar concerns from is this just going to be a sort of, turn everything into robots? Are we taking humans out of the process, or are we just putting them in the right places? And so forth. So I think we've sort of really beautifully, and having this diverse panel has been really good for that, sort of covered off on sort of those initial threshold questions people have about rules as code. And like you, Pia, I'm really excited about the journey forward. So how we can, work together, on stage 2, stage 3, and going forward. I know we've got a lot of work we're doing at the Allens Hub on that, but right now I'd like to hand over back to Natalia to talk about the future events that are planned, including on the stage 2 and stage 3.
Thank you, Lyria. A great session, and a special thank you to our President, Marina Yastrubov, for her leadership and dynamism in making this and many other inspiring conversations possible, all at the pointy end of law, technology and society. Now to Matt Sawkill to launch the RAC Community of Practice. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Natalia. So just to quickly introduce our organisation and give you a bit of context, Pia already mentioned Code for Canada and the work they were doing with Rules as Code. With her, as you might guess from the name, we're kind of the equivalent civic tech organisation in this part of the world. So we work with partners in government to help them embrace digital ways of working, and we do that work in the open, ideally so everyone can learn from it and benefit from what we discover in our work. Rules as Code is just one of the areas we work in, and definitely our expertise is in the sort of implementation and experimentation side of things. So we build software, we try out new things, and we work out the challenges of doing it in a public sector context. Obviously, we're really keen to collaborate with people from different areas of expertise and people who are doing similar work as well. And recently, when we started talking about our Rules as Code project, we launched actually this week with New South Wales Government. A lot of people started reaching out to us and saying, hi, we'd like to be involved, we'd like to be in the conversation. We heard from Marina and the team at AUSCL, we heard from the team at La Trobe Law Tech as well. And we were just really excited to sort of start putting our heads together. What we all have in common as organisations is that we see the potential of Rules as Code and where it can go, but we also make sure that people and their rights come first when decisions are made. So we were already putting a community of practice platform together at Code for Australia to cover a lot of topics, and it just made logical sense to launch it today alongside this discussion and get the Rules as Code community together. So everyone's invited. If you're on this call, we'd love to have you there. There was a ton of conversation in the Q&A today that hasn't quite been answered, so it might be a place, like Pia said, to pick up those sort of level 2 and 3 conversations and start getting really into the nitty-gritty with this stuff. We're hoping to have a bit of a local focus to start with, just to sort of look at the shared challenges and collaborate on those, but we do have some connections with international groups, the Canadian projects, for example, and that'll all be part of the conversation as well. So please join up. The link's in the Q&A if you'd like to click right through, or you can get it on screen or in some of the email follow-up that'll come around from the event as well. So thanks very much for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you all online.
Thank you, Matt. I encourage everyone, of course, to join this fabulous initiative, our community of practice for RAC. Now, what's coming up? We are running RAC masterclasses with Smart Legal and Data 61. So Guido will be joining us and Adrian to run those sessions, and expert panel discussions on neurotechnology and the future of criminal law. And we have a lineup of many other exceptional speakers. Subscribe today for an invitation to these and other events, and also follow the Allens Hub and the fabulous work being done by Lyria and her team at UNSW. A huge thank you to UNSW for providing our tech platform for today. See you at our next event, and bye for now.